закладами вищої освіти. Мене звати Катерина Супрун, я представляю Міністерство освіти і науки України. Сьогодні ми з вами раді вітати колег з топового університету Великобританії The Open University, які розкажуть нам всі секрети онлайн-навчання. І вебінар транслюється англійською мовою, тому, without further ado, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice seeing all of you, and thank you for connecting. My name is Katerina Sopron, and I'm working at the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine. We are very happy to welcome all of you here today at this webinar organized by our partners, the Open University here for Ukrainian universities specifically, with the support of the President Fund on Education, Science and Sport and Karma Consultancy Group. We are increasingly happy to be able to welcome all of you here today. The number of registered participants skyrocketed to over 700, those who wanted to listen and to get the hacks on how to organize distance learning. So this webinar is increasingly important right now for our higher education institutions, as most of them have transitioned to online delivery, either in full or partially. They have been successful in that, but we would anyhow be very happy and glad to benefit from additional insights of the Open University on how to organize distance learning. So the Open University is the university that organizes the learning process in online form exclusively, which means they know best how to deliver online lessons, how to do the assessment, how to work with educational design. And we are very happy for their support to Ukraine on this matter and for their commitment to share the know-how and the skills on the topic. I would like to welcome the team of the Open University here today. It's Sarah McKay, Senior Project Manager, Vice Chancellor's Officer of the Open University. And I would pass on the floor to her to say just a couple of words at the beginning and then to transition to the team. So Sarah, the floor is yours.
Hello, welcome everybody. I'm actually going to pass the buck again, unfortunately. We've had a chat with our team, and our Professor Martin Weller is actually going to lead the charge for us. So I'm going to hand directly over to Martin, but pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll just share my screen. Sorry. Great, I hope that's coming through for you all. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting us, and we're very pleased to be able to share our knowledge with so many of you. Yeah, as Katerina said, there's a lot more than we were expecting. So I think that's brilliant, and we're so pleased so many of you want to come along. It does make, I think, it perhaps difficult to be interactive with over 700 people, obviously. And so what we'll try to do is to follow the chat, and if we can answer the questions at the end, we've got 15 minutes at the end of our session today, where we'll try to wrap up questions. But if not, we'll try to follow up afterwards. And we've had quite a few questions through already, so we'll try to answer those. But if not, we'll follow up later as we can. So with such a large group, feel free to leave as you need to. Don't feel you need to let us know. That's brilliant. I think I'd like to see this, and I think we all see this as the start of a dialogue with you, really. The Open University is committed to supporting our Ukrainian colleagues. And so don't think of this as the sum of our knowledge, but really the start of our knowledge. We're going to give you a taster, an introduction to some of the things we offer. We'll provide the slides afterwards that can be shared. So there's probably quite a lot of information in them, so don't feel you need to sort of take it all in now. And that's how we're going to start. So I'll just give you the agenda. So this is the agenda for the day. I think our aim really is to kind of provide an overview of what we do, a kind of introduction. So we've chosen two aspects in particular to go into detail, which is learning design and assessment, but we could have chosen many others. So don't, don't think these are the only things to offer. And I think what we wanted to give here was give you a feel for the sorts of things that we could offer and that we have expertise in and that you might like to follow up with. So we're going to start with an introduction from my colleague Andrew Law, who will give you an overview of the Open University and how we work. And then it's back to me, and I'm going to just talk briefly about how you can conduct online learning and achieve some of the things that you might want to achieve that you do in a face-to-face setting. And that really will set the scene for the talks that are coming. And then my colleagues Natasha and Mark will give an introduction to learning design, which is how we go about designing our courses. And there's lots of rich material in their session. And then my colleague Simon Cross will talk about online assessment. Online assessment is an issue that often comes up when people move to delivering content online. And so Simon will give you an overview of some of the work we've been doing at the Open University and elsewhere. And then at the end, we thought we'd end with a discussion around what areas do you think it might be useful to work further on, what areas of interest to you, and how we might progress that. So that's the outline of the day. We've allowed 2 hours. It might run slightly longer with so many people here, but let's say feel free to leave as you need to do. So I hope today is useful in itself, but as I say, I'd like to see it as the start of a dialogue and a conversation between us and you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Andrew to give an overview. I'll stop sharing.
Hi all, this is Andrew Law. I'm going to give a very quick introduction to the Open University. I'm not an expert in learning design or any of the other factors. I'm going to give you a very straightforward introduction to what the Open University is, and then my colleagues will pick up on these more detailed issues. Can I just check you can see the screen?
Yes, it works great. Thank you.
Okay, good. So who are we? Who is the Open University? Well, we are the largest university in the European landmass, in continental Europe. We have over 200,000 students, and we teach most of the students in the UK that are taking part-time degrees. The Open University is teaching many of them. We're open for several reasons, one of which is we teach online distance learning, but also we have no entry requirements for undergraduate entry. So we will take anybody onto an undergraduate degree, whether or not they have a qualification. It's not just the online and the distance element, it's the fact that we're open to everybody. We're not free, so we do charge fees, but anybody can come and try to take a degree with the Open University. We particularly attract the deprived and the disadvantaged, and that's our mission, to help those that wouldn't otherwise get a chance. And that includes a very large number of disabled people, people with either neurodiverse or physical disabilities or other challenges to their learning experiences. Many of our students are very, very busy. They are studying part-time. And they're studying part-time because they either are caring for people, looking after people, or they are at work. So many students studying part-time, but businesses love us. They love sending their students to the university. They sponsor many of our students. They think that they're getting very good value for money because our degrees are much less expensive than the traditional degree in the United Kingdom, probably around half of the cost. So what do we do? How does this all work? We have 130 degrees broken up into 450 modules. Most students learn around 8 to 16 hours a week part-time if they're studying part-time over several years, not 3 years, over several more years. They can study at full intensity. They can study full-time, but most students are studying part-time. And we have to cater for people studying at home, at work, in prisons. We are the largest educator of students in secure environments. We think prisoners should have an opportunity to improve their lives. So we educate prisons. And I say submarines here because we're also a very large trainer of the military forces in terms of degrees. And we have to work out, how do you get people learning when they are hundreds of thousands of miles away under the water, so in submarines. As I say, 200,000 students, 4,500 tutors at least, and the support element of our teaching is critical. These are not lecturers, they are tutors, and we'll come back to that, particularly Simon will come back to that later, roughly in groups of 15 to 20. We are online. That means we are making millions of transactions a day, and millions of quizzes and assessments. And again, Simon will come on to the assessment element later. So very much online, very much distant, mostly part-time, and significantly focused on people whose lives are very, very disturbed and disrupted by other things, caring or other disadvantages. The only little bit of Ukrainian I could find, but we do have some Ukrainian on our site. And some of it's publicly available. There is a web address at the bottom there, and you can see. The reason I put this up is we do have some free learning in the public domain. And one of the things that we have there are examples of bits of our courses. And some of them have been translated into Ukrainian. So when we're talking later about what does an Open University course look like, where are the videos and where are the lecturers, you could look at one of these courses to see what a small bit of a course looks like in Ukrainian. So that web link, if you can see it, and we'll give you the slides, will show you some courses in Ukrainian. Jumar and the other teams here are working on translating more courses, more short free courses into Ukrainian. There will be some there, and they're really there at the moment to support the refugees that are coming into the UK, so that they have some basic learning in Ukrainian that they can benefit from. But as I say, the reason for sharing this is to show you what a bit of a course from the Open University would look like. And as I say, these are not lectures, they are not recorded lectures, they are courses written online. Okay, the other key aspect of the support in terms of online is having tutors. So these, again, are not lecturers speaking in recordings. They are meeting their students in groups of 15 to 20 people once every 2 or 3 weeks in an online synchronous environment, although it's recorded. If students want to look at the recordings afterwards, asking questions, helping them understand difficult subjects, dealing with issues that they're dealing with, and really critically, helping them with other issues apart from the teaching, but pointing them in the direction of other support that they might need. We know a lot of learners need other forms of support, not just good tutoring. So tutors are a really critical bit of the success of the Open University. When we meet our students, they love our materials, they love us, but they particularly love their tutors and appreciate the support of their tutors. Having said that, some people go all the way through their degree and never meet their tutor. They're just very good at independent learning. Here it says the tutors use the course materials, they use whiteboards, interactive experiences as you'd get on Zoom and elsewhere. We actually use Adobe Connect, but you can use lots of tutoring systems. But alongside the teaching materials and the tutor, we also introduce online experiences. And particularly in science, we have an open science laboratory, and some of this again is free, and there's a link to the free materials that you can try out and use with your own students if that's useful. These are not accessible, but we can book our students on access to telescopes so that they can see telescopes live from Tenerife to do astronomy. And we have some engineering labs where we have rooms full of small robots, shelves and shelves and shelves of experiments that you'd usually see in a lab, and you would usually give to a student in a lab and say, do Hooke's law, do this with a spring, do this with a pendulum, but instead they have access to it remotely and they can try. I'm hoping you can see this video. Can you see the video? So this student is looking at a video, a live stream of their robotic experiment in a lab. They're taking recordings from the experiment, and they've been set a task. I'm afraid I've forgotten all my physics from many years ago, but they've been set a task to measure something here. This will be to do with frequency and something. Somebody help me out here, but it's something physics connected. They get the data, they book a slot with the robot, they collect that data, and then they're given an assessment exercise on using that data. Okay, it's really important to understand there are many open universities around the world. Many of them model themselves on us, not all. Some do not work. Some have very bad reputations, and I won't name them, but some have very good reputations. I would just like to state it can work, and it does work in the United Kingdom. We have a very high standard of rating in the UK. We are in the top 6 of all British universities in terms of student satisfaction. We provide the largest number of chief executives in industry than any other university. That includes Cambridge and Oxford. We have more CEOs, chief executives, than Cambridge and Oxford produce. We produce the 3rd most graduates for tech companies, and we are also a research university. Most of my colleagues that you will now talk to, not me or listen from, they're researchers. They have PhDs and postdocs, and they are doing proper, really good research. We're particularly good in educational research. So we also have a good research reputation, and we do take postgraduates. I think that's probably me. I think that's enough to, I hope, give you a sense of what the British Open University is. I know I've spoken very quickly, but the slides will be here. Martin, shall I hand back to you? And I think next, well, I'll leave you to pick up, Martin. And I will stop sharing. Oh, I will leave that up while you want.
I think you have to stop sharing so I can share. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to say, I think at the moment we can't go into the chat. We can only talk to hosts and panelists. So I wanted to say to everyone, we're not being rude. We're not ignoring you. For some reason, we haven't got the everyone option. So I don't know if we can sort that out. So I hope you can see that okay. I'm going to give an overview of good online learning, some principles. I think this helps set the scene for the 2 presentations that you'll have that come afterwards. I've spent a long time doing online learning. I launched our first major online course in 1999, and that had like 15,000 students. So we've been doing this for a long time. And I think since the pandemic and lots of universities have had to do online learning, I've seen some of these sort of myths and beliefs shared about online learning that you often see come up in conversations or in the media. So I've picked out some of these that I think from our experience aren't true. So people often say students don't make social connections. They don't make friends when they're only online. They need to be on campus. Or you can't do group work effectively online. Another myth is often that it's cheaper to do online learning. And as Andrew said, you can do online learning badly, and that probably is cheaper. But if you want to do it well, it probably costs as much as a face-to-face course, but it's a different type of expenditure. There's often a myth that it's lower quality than face-to-face education. And again, that needn't be the case, although you do have to work hard to make online learning effective. And there's also a myth, I think, that all students prefer face-to-face education. Now, it's true, many students do prefer face-to-face, but as Andrew was just saying, for lots of students, being able to work online, be much more flexible, really suits their lifestyle. So I think we need to be just aware of these kind of myths that get perpetuated about online learning. So I thought I'd pick out 5 elements of online learning and just go through some of them based on our experience at the Open University and the research that's been done by us and other people. So the first of these I thought I'd pick out was group work. Often people want to conduct group work on a face-to-face setting. And when they try to move that online, they encounter problems. So I think one of the big differences is whether you're working what we call synchronously, so in real time, everyone's online at the same time, or asynchronously, which might be via email or an online forum, so people are not all online at the same time. And actually, that makes a really big difference in how you conduct your group work. Our experience is it takes much longer to realise group work online, especially if you are operating in this asynchronous mode where not everyone is online at the same time. I had a colleague who joined Open University, and he used to run a group work activity face-to-face that would take an afternoon to do. But when we moved it online, it would take about 3 weeks to do that effectively. I think perhaps more than any other aspect of online education, it really requires careful design and detailed instructions to stop students becoming frustrated and for them to know what they need to do. Some of what we might call the social glue necessary for groups to work well is sometimes missing online. Groups tend to work well when people trust each other and they know each other and they can work well. And what this highlights is it's really important at the start of a course to introduce some kind of social interaction, some kind of social connection. We often run icebreaker activities, and I think the learning design team will talk about those. So getting students to know each other and trust each other socially before they go into groups is really important. But there are also some benefits about operating online. So it means your group activities can be based around things that happen online much more easily. So that might be making a document together, making media together, finding resources, commenting, those kind of things. So students are in the online space already, so it makes doing some of those activities much more easy for them. And although the asynchronous element means it sometimes takes longer, it also provides flexibility and reassurance for many students. Lots of students don't like group work and they struggle to make their voice heard in a group. Now, if you're working asynchronously and online, it gives students time to prepare and feel more part of the group. I would say group work is nearly always a stressful component, whether it's face-to-face or online. And so I think you just need to be careful in your design of a course, and the learning design team will talk about this, of knowing when a group project is coming up and almost preparing students for it, so that it's not a risk factor and they don't get fed up and want to drop out. So group work is completely achievable online. I wanted to explore this asynchronous element more. So not everyone is online at the same time. And I think often when people move to online education, they adapt the lecture model. And so we have a lecture at a certain time and we have live seminars or live discussion groups. But actually that loses some of the benefit of being an online provider. And actually, I think the asynchronous versus synchronous mode of working is perhaps more significant than face-to-face versus online. And I think we've seen in a lot of the recent criticisms of online learning what I might call a lecture deficit model. So people are trying to just replicate the face-to-face lecture online. And then, of course, that's not quite as good as the face-to-face lecture, but they're not really taking advantage of the really useful and good things you can do online. So if you're operating asynchronously, you can make extensive use of online materials. You can have all your content in a virtual learning environment. You can use videos, blogs, podcasts, create this kind of real rich of media and resources that people can put into their learning. Andrew mentioned the kind of student flexibility. Our students can adapt their study around their commitments, whether that's caring for people, work, and those kind of things. And it also gives greater student control. So if a student's struggling to understand something, they're not in a 1 hour lecture where they have to understand it. They can spend as long as they need to understand a particular topic. And similarly with the group work, it really gives people time to interact. So often we find that students who might be quiet in a face-to-face setting and not be the people who put their hand up will join in an asynchronous discussion forum where they can think carefully about their answers and type them out and research them. So it gives them a voice, but they might not have it. And also gives you increased curriculum flexibility. I run the Open degree at the Open University, which combines 250 different modules that students can pick and choose and create their own learning pathway. And the reason we can do that is because we don't have to worry about timetabling. We don't have to worry about if this lecture's going on over here, we can't have the same lecture, we can't have another lecture going on over here that students want to sign up for. The students can really mix and match a vast range of courses. And that's a really positive benefit of an asynchronous approach. I think learning design is another of my 5 aspects, and the learning design team will go into this more in detail. So I won't say much, but I think really it's probably the key element to having a good online course and a good online experience is to really think from a design methodology. What is it you want to do and how are you going to teach it? And I think often we don't see that when we're on campus. We know that design is determined for us. We'll have so many lectures in a seminar, some seminars and maybe some lab sessions, and that's set up and that's how those things run. And there are many different approaches to learning design, and the team will go through the one we use at the Open University. And it helps you consider questions like, if you want to teach a particular topic, what's the best method for doing that? If I have to do a particular type of activity, maybe I should vary it so students aren't doing all the same type of activity. What's the workload for these different approaches? We've done a lot of work on workload for our students and how that affects their retention and performance. And also to think about, what can you do with new technologies? So it really allows you, I think, to take a step back and to think, what can I do to teach this subject rather than just the standard lectures? And so I think familiarity with our lecture-based model means that often you have a kind of inbuilt sense of what learning design is without ever thinking about it explicitly. And this is a chance, I think, when you move online, to think again about how you might want to teach subjects. Assessment, Simon will talk about this later, but I think I've put it in here because I think often it's the first area that people focus on when they shift online. So during the pandemic, we saw a big shift to online exams because we couldn't have people coming to the same places. And these were in various formats that I think Simon will talk about. So we had timed exams, whether that was an hour or 2 weeks, proctored exams where either a person is watching you take the exam or there's an artificial intelligence system monitoring you, or open book exams, closed book exams, but all conducted online. And we've done some research at the Open University, and we found that this shift to online exams when there was previously face-to-face exams has led to an increase in participation. The number of students who take the exam has gone up, and also an increase in performance. So there's a big shift now that students actually don't want to go back to doing the face-to-face exams, and that applies to all universities. We've seen that, but it does raise something of a dilemma, and that the face-to-face exam is unpopular with students. Now they've conducted online exams, but the standard exam that we run can be subject to cheating. So I think there's a question to be asked about how we conduct assessment now, and maybe one of the things we can start thinking about are more what you might think of as internet native forms of assessment, things that you would do that lend themselves to being online. And I've given some examples there, like editing Wikipedia or creating open resources. So things that are more based around being online. But I think the point here is that once you move online, it gives you an opportunity to rethink assessment again. And the last issue I think I'll talk about is resources. So Andrew mentioned our Open Learn site. And really the question when you're creating an online course is, why would you create everything from start, from new? There's so much good stuff out there that you could bring into your course. And that really allows you as an educator to concentrate on the areas where you add value as an educator, whether that's explained in something, providing support, prompting discussion, leading activities. There are a number of what we call OER repositories, open education resources. One of these is Open Learn, which Andrew mentioned. We have many different formats, so you can download those as Word files, XML files. They're openly licensed, that material, so you can reuse it, so you could take it and translate it, for instance, or adapt it to your context, and they're of high quality. Particularly in the United States and Canada, they've been working a lot on open textbooks. These are all openly licensed books, particularly in subjects like statistics, that again, you can take and adapt and reuse for your own context. And there's also a number of other places, like YouTube is a great site for finding really good resources, and the Khan Academy provide lots of useful videos. So you could quickly build up quite a rich texture, quite a rich course from using other people's resources that you don't need to create from scratch. So I think one way to think about this is we use this word affordances, which really just means what is the technology best for? And face-to-face has many good uses, and I think you can use that. So for instance, I think asynchronous discussions, when everyone's not online at the same time, is really good at getting detailed dissection and analysis of a document. It gives people a long time to go through a document and find other resources and references. But it's not very good, for example, compared with face-to-face or Zoom for making decisions. If you want to make a quick decision, it's better to be online at the same time. So I think you can think of wherever you are and whatever you're doing as a set of sliders or a scale of things that you want to think about. So given those 5 elements I talked about, group work, you can conduct the face-to-face version of that or some kind of fully online version of that. And it may be for each institution, you move these scales up and down as you decide what you want to progress through. So I'll just conclude now. This is just to kind of give you an overview. I think when you think about doing online learning, there's a real range of changes that you can do to how you teach. And I think you need to think of it as the start of a journey. It's not just that you've converted to doing face-to-face lectures into online, and that's online learning done. It's really about how you start building, adapting different parts of that. And online learning can be as good, and for some students and in some circumstances better than face-to-face learning. And I think we really need to think about what's best about online learning and how to make best use of those elements that it gives us, those benefits. And I think it's often the starting point is that we recreate the face-to-face model, but I think we shouldn't just think that's the end point. We should think about moving beyond that. So I'm going to hand over to my learning design colleagues now. I'll stop sharing and go over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, got that. Yeah, thanks.
You've got it. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome everybody, and it's great to be talking to you all. I'm joined by my colleague Mark Williams, and we're both senior learning designers at the Open University, and we're just going to give you a quick introduction to learning design at the OU. So just a couple of things. We'll turn our cameras off so that you can focus on the slides, because there's lots of information there, and we will be sending you the PowerPoint, so you don't have to take too many notes. We may mention modules. And by modules, you probably know these as courses. On this slide, you'll see that we've got a team, an Open University Learning Design team blog, and also a Twitter page. And we encourage you to have a look at those when you have time. So let's move straight in. Right, okay, so learning design. The work that we do within our learning design team falls into these 3 categories. So first of all, it's all evidence-based. So it's focused on sound principles, on evidence, and from insights that we've gathered from the students themselves and from analytics that we gather from our modules. We're also heavily involved in continual research, and this feeds into the ways that we design our modules. We also, in the second box there, we work with colleagues. To ensure that all our modules are designed in a way that provides an inclusive and engaging experience for all our students. What we want to do is we want to inspire and encourage them. We also want to support them to transform their lives and to enrich their communities. We do this by providing learning design workshops for our module teams, where we help them to plan their student journey and provide support for designing effective and engaging activities. And as a learning design team, we work in close partnership with our academic and production colleagues to design and evaluate our modules. And we also do quite a lot of work with external partners. And you'll see in that word cloud on the right, some of the words that highlight some of our values. We want to be collaborative, innovative, creative, supportive, and compassionate. So what do we mean by learning design? So you'll see a definition here, and it's all about putting in place a really structured approach to designing, developing, and evaluating our teaching. And it's very important to us that we put the student at the heart of this process. So it's all about ensuring that we design for student engagement with our learning tools, materials, and communities. And to make sure that our approach is student-centered, we look at specific learner needs and we consider what impact that might have on the design of the module. And one of the ways we do this is we encourage our module teams to create student profiles. We ask them to think about a range of typical students and create profiles for them. And to do that, we look at their home and work backgrounds, their educational experiences, and their motivations for studying with us. And by gathering all this information, we try to determine, to look at how they might be studying, what their strengths and their weaknesses are in terms of their study skills, and what they like and dislike about study. On this slide, you can see that we've created an example student profile. And this is for a safeguarding course. And you can see here how we've drawn together a range of information about this student. So we'll consider all this information to look at what the implications might be for the way that we design our modules. And this means that we can identify any issues and we're able to address them while we're designing the materials. Other ways that we put the student at the heart of what we're doing are real-time student feedback and by using a student panel based around curriculum design. So the real-time student feedback gives us an opportunity to support student success while the module while the students are studying their modules. And this takes the form of a short questionnaire or a series of short questionnaires that are placed at pivotal points within the module. So that might be perhaps a week before the students start to work on their marked assignments. And our intention here is that we can provide immediate action based on the answers they give. So this might be in the feedback to the questions, or we can direct students to the support that they need. And our learning designers will work with the module teams to guide them through this process. We also have a curriculum design student panel, and this is a panel of students who've kindly volunteered to provide input into our projects and to help with any scholarship work that we're doing, either within learning design or within the faculties. And this means that we can work directly with our students, and their input will inform the way that we design and develop our modules. And this could include the way we design our activities and the way that we use some of our tools. And we can learn from their experience as students as we explore what works and what doesn't work. And this enables us to improve what we do. This student-centered approach also provides opportunities for students to work with us and co-create the learning experiences that we offer. So we've developed a carefully considered core offer for our module teams. And our work will usually begin with a learning design workshop, which I'll describe a bit later. We also offer targeted workshops and sessions, and these help the module teams to design with retention in mind. We have a series of iceberg principles which look at that retention, and there is a publication on this that we can make available and share with you. All of our sessions are flexible and we tailor them to the needs of the module teams. And our aim is to advise them and share good practice and research. We also use tools created within the OU to map our student workloads. And that means what we're doing is we're assessing how long it will take the student to work through their materials. And this is based around word counts, the length time it takes to complete activities, audio and video timings, and agreed timings for using the different tools and assets that are included in the module. We're also there to help the module teams to map out the student journey. And this could be at the module level or at the block level or at a week level. And we advise them on the use of tools and technologies. And finally, we'll conduct some evaluation both during the production stage and while the module is live. So this gives you an idea of what the process looks like. So we start at the Learning Design workshop. We follow that up with an action plan where we map out exactly how we can support the module teams. And we'll help with that initial design. We'll also provide support during the production process as modules produce their drafts. And finally, while students are progressing with their studies, we'll provide analytical data that shows who the students are, what their study patterns are like, what their average scores are, and how they're engaging with our materials. And once the module team is complete, we can then identify case studies and scholarship opportunities, and that will feed into future design work. So this slide shows some of the support that we offer to our module teams. So we can help them with the course structure of their modules. We help them with engagement by advising them on active learning and using different activity types. We can estimate the workload for them based on their draft materials. And we also provide guidance on learning outcomes and building an effective learning journey. We can also advise them on the use of the tools that are available to them and how they might use them. And we can provide different methods of evaluation, which I've mentioned earlier. And just to show you that it's not just learning designers, we're not just working on our own, we're part of a wider team. And this slide shows you some of the roles involved in designing and developing our modules. And as you can see, there are a lot of people, but we do work collaboratively with everybody to make sure that we produce consistent and effective teaching and learning across all our qualifications. This slide I thought I'd share with you because it shows you where the learning design takes place. So we come in right at the beginning of the planning stage for each of our modules, and we work with the teams through the design and the development stage. And during this period, we'll make a series of a number of recommendations and suggestions for how the module teams can manage those risks, challenges, and opportunities. And we provide them with all the support and guidance that they need. At the end, here you'll see that we have the evaluation stage that I mentioned earlier, and that takes place while the students are studying their modules. I just wanted to touch on the Learning Design workshop, and this is the first session that we will have with the module teams, and it's the foundation for them to start to design their modules. What we offer is facilitation to ensure that there's a consistent understanding of the module itself. We look at the key concepts and ideas, and we explore what the risks, challenges, and opportunities might be. At this workshop, we like to involve student representatives and also the tutors, because they can provide some really valuable feedback. And then following on from this workshop, we'll put together an action plan and then make recommendations that we can follow up after the session, after this particular workshop. So that you heard me mention the student journey, and I thought it might be useful just to give you a brief introduction to this. So at a learner journey workshop, what we'll do is we'll help the module team to map out the learning that the journey that the learner will experience. So we try to map up across the weeks how the skills will develop, and we look at the key concepts that they're presenting by week or by block, and we'll identify how the students will engage with that material. We can also use this mapping to identify how we help students with their assignments, and we can show how our activities will progress across the modules to ensure that they build on each other. Oops. Right, okay. I noticed that earlier there were some questions around the design of activities. So I thought I'd just provide you with a brief outline that I hope will help you. So we use a constructively aligned approach that looks at teaching and learning as a whole system. So we make sure that all the aspects of teaching and assessment work together to support quality learning. So we start here with our learning outcomes, and we make sure that any activities that we design provide opportunities for the students to meet those outcomes. And we also ensure that the assessment is designed to assess how well the students have achieved those outcomes. So this slide just shows you the 3 stages of designing activities. So what we ask ourselves is, what will students be doing? And what will they be doing based on the learning outcomes that we've provided? We also ask ourselves what the learners will create as a result of each activity, and then we make decisions on how the activity will be delivered. So what are the tools and platforms that we'll use, and what will the student be producing? So you can see here a little diagram. So here we've got what will the learners be doing, what will they create, and we'll also look at what platforms are best to deliver that activity. At the Open University, we've identified 6 core activity types. Now, what we'd like to do is we encourage our module teams to use a variety of activity types, not to just stick to one. And this means that the students are going to be more engaged with the materials that they're studying. So we might have assimilative, which is reading, watching, listening, thinking about things. We try to get them to look at finding and handling information. We'd also like them to communicate and debate, discuss and argue. We have productive activities, which means that the students will actually be creating something. And we have activities based around practice, and that is putting students in real world situations or simulated sessions. So you can see together, using that range, we're going to keep students much more engaged. And then we have assessment at the end. So looking at different types of assessment, which Simon is going to cover later on. So this is my final slide before I hand over to Mark. I just wanted to mention that we work very closely with careers and with our library team. And this is so that we can ensure that employability skills and digital and information skills are embedded into the activities. So our colleagues in employability and in the library can look at activities and make suggestions on how we can include these skills. And at the Open University, we've developed a very robust employability framework, which has identified the skills that that employers are particularly looking for, and our digital and information literacy team have provided a very good framework for developing those information literacy skills. So I'm just going to hand over to Mark now.
Thanks, Natasha. That was really clear. So what I'm going to be doing now in this part of the presentation is giving you advice and guidance in an area that we work with in our kind of work with module teams. So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on how we help our module teams to get learners working together. And as this quote makes clear, this is all about helping learners feel comfortable working with others in a trusting way so they can share ideas and help others with their learning. So this is about how we design this into our modules and courses when we work with our module teams. So if we go to the next slide. Thanks, Natasha. So collaboration can involve learners discussing themes with friends and family, sharing knowledge and experiences, as well as research with other learners, working in small groups to solve problems, having discussions with peers, and giving as well as receiving feedback to help improve work. And this is as well as working with other learners and a tutor in a tutorial session. There may even be opportunities for learners to work within their local communities. And all of these things are important too, and importantly can be brought back into online learning. So next slide, Natasha, that's great. We know that learners will engage in activities if they help develop their understanding, their knowledge, their skills, and help them to achieve. Therefore, as learning designers, we'll work with teams to find suitable opportunities where learners can work together to solve problems and develop a better understanding of their subject. So these opportunities mean that learners will participate in them. It's how we get buy-in with our students, and that's really important because what we realize is that our students are becoming more and more strategic in their learning. Next slide. We want to make sure that the benefits of activities are clear to our learners, and therefore, when we're planning activities where learners will work together, we will find ways to link this to assessment so learners can achieve marks. Designing collaborative activities also helps teams to develop important life and employability skills for their learners, such as teamwork, communication skills, sharing ideas, and feedback to develop work and developing roles and responsibilities. Okay, next slide. The one thing we want to avoid is learners feeling anxious about working with others, and we know that this can happen. So as learning designers, we know that we have to give learners the opportunity to prepare for working in group tasks. If we don't do this, learners could well drop out of the courses and modules by feeling that they lack the skills to engage in these successfully. So for group work, we will help to design steps that prepare learners. So for example, in this example, this could involve learners researching what roles individuals might have in a group, practicing those roles using case studies, for example, trying out group roles in pairs before moving to a larger group task. And at the cornerstone of all of this is learner reflection. We would want learners to reflect on all aspects of preparation in order to show that they kind of understand that. Part of our role as learning designers is also to show teams what technology is available to help learners work collaboratively. So we will help them to consider ways of using it so that learners are clear that although they're working online, they have a community of other learners working alongside them. And this is really important because this will stop them feeling isolated. We will also use technology to bring the learning community into the course or modules gradually to help build up learner confidence. So for example, we can use word clouds, aggregated polls and forums to help learners gain a sense of belonging to a group. And these technologies can help learners see the responses of others who are studying on the same course as them. And they can share ideas and see the responses of others, using these to understand how other learners are thinking. And again, this is really important. We want learners to be learning from each other as well as from their tutors. So I want to show you just a couple of examples of some of the technology that we use. So this is an inline discussion, and this comes from a music module. And we can see here that learners have been asked to post up in the forum what they think the challenges are for musicians due to the online streaming of music. So learners post up their ideas, and then they can respond to other learners' comments. They can see their feedback that they get from other learners and then use it to reflect on the theme of their studies. using it to answer the questions that they have been set. So you can see here how that would look on a virtual learning environment. And learners have direct access into this, and they can see the conversations taking place, and they can respond to those conversations accordingly. So from there, we can also use technology such as Open Studio, and this allows learners to share imagery on a theme. So for example, in this example, we have an icebreaker activity where learners find an object that represents the global to them. So it might be an object they have in their homes or an object that is in their immediate environment. They can share this with others as a way of getting to know others and to respond to the images other learners have chosen to display. So this kind of means that they can ask more about those objects, or they can express an opinion about those objects. And in doing so, they can learn more about the students who are working alongside them and feel confident that they're getting to know others. So the next example is of an Open Studio activity in a fine arts subject. And here learners have been asked to find an image that represents the Renaissance. So learners choose an image that supports their knowledge of the Renaissance. And by doing this, learners can expand their knowledge and understanding by learning from other learners and their chosen images. And this might lead learners into researching more about these objects. And of course, our aim is that learners not only learn from their tutors, but from each other. And this is why that we're finding all the time that we need to really get learners working together, and we're developing more interactives that can help learners to engage and work with each other. So we do that all the time, supporting innovation. Okay, so as learning designers, we also engage in research to best support our learners. And we look at current educational studies to consider how we might bring important aspects into our own module design work. For example, these are questions that I was keen to develop solutions to. So these questions are, how can small group teaching enhance learning, and how can we facilitate this using existing technology? And I wanted to find clear ways of providing advice and guidance and give that to our teams so that we could design small group teaching to develop a range of skills. So helping learners to develop their own awareness, as well as finding solutions to problems through working with others. Once we've developed research and found solutions to important design questions, we use our understanding to design and develop resources for our teams. And we can use these to lead discussions when helping design learning experience with groups, or we can use them to help develop workshops where we might practically work with teams to design activities. So in this example, I produced an infographic that I could use to help structure small group teaching activities within Adobe Connect, which is an online system that the Open University uses to bring learners together for online lectures, tutorials, and group activities. So as discussed before, we want to start with activities that allow learners to introduce themselves in a safe way. So we will always start with online icebreaker activities that help learners to get to know each other and develop a space of trust. And this will also help learners to get a sense of their online identity and practice it. So from this, we can build in more complex activities that test higher education skills. So within this, our suggestion was that we create a range of icebreaker activities, think about how we can use quizzes, creative projects, and gamification in order to kind of get learners used to interacting with each other in a low stakes environment. And then start to think about how learners could engage in internet searches on a given theme, and then start to use their answers to these kind of internet searches to introduce their knowledge with their peers, with other students, and then introduce who they are. In this example, we have an activity that enables learners to read a text individually, but then come together with a group of others to find ways of responding to that text. In doing so, they designate roles and responsibilities, and they share ideas and feedback to develop and refine a final outcome. This is done through reflection. And without the icebreaker activities and starting in a more kind of low stakes environment, we really wouldn't be able to get to this stage with our learners. It's really important that we don't just drop them in to something quite complex. When students get to know each other a bit more and develop that sense of trust, we can then get them to kind of work together in more complex settings, more complex environments, so they can use each other and learn from each other to develop their understanding of theoretical texts and produce outcomes based on that. So learning design are involved in testing whether learners are engaging with activities in a way that develops confidence and understanding. So this is especially important when we design a new activity, because if it's not benefiting learners, then we'll need to change it. Getting a learner's response to an activity can help us make slight alterations to it. However, knowing that the activities work based on learner feedback means that we can use the design confidently with other teams. So recently, I worked with a team to test an activity where learners worked with each other, using a range of forums to discuss books that they had read as part of a book club activity. So in this activity, learners shared ideas and research. They provided feedback to each other, and they built knowledge around these learner discussions. So in this kind of instance, the module team took away module-led information for the first time and actually gave the students the independence to learn more from each other. So initially, it created some anxiety around the idea that the module team would be kind of more removed from this activity. But actually, we realized that learners felt really empowered from this when we tested it. And this is really the ways we kind of want to test out these kind of activities. If we're kind of like engaging learners in a different way, you know, for the first time, we want to know it's working and that they're not too anxious about it. Okay, so what we kind of learned when we did test the book club event, that most students found it really kind of useful. 87% of students really enjoyed the activity and found it was a really important part of their studies. And actually for them, it developed this sense that they did have the independence to actually look at work from their own perspective and to share that with other students rather than just relying on the information that their tutors had given them. So it was a really, really good activity that developed that sense of empowerment for our learners. And we can see that from the quotation that we have at the bottom of the slide. So what we'll always do is when we test activities, we will ask a series of questions, but we'll also leave a free response text box so that learners can give any opinion they want to. So in this one, we have from a student that they found the book club a useful way to push themselves more into independent study rather than merely relying on textbooks that they were given. So again, as I've said, they found that a bit daunting, but enjoyed the interaction with other students. And because of this, we've kept this a part of the module structure. This is an English literature module. And we've used this example to work with other teams and to develop independent collaborative activities across our modules. One of the things that we're kind of starting to get more engaged with now is assessment. And one of the big questions that we ask ourselves is how do we allow learners into the process of assessment as active participants? So we're starting to really think about this a little bit more and develop resources. So we want to think about how we use group discussions so that learners can decode assessment criteria. We often find that learners find the criteria in which we're kind of judging them to be quite confusing, and they don't always know how to work with it. So we want to try and find activities that will enable our learners to decode it and use their own language. We also want to think about whether we can use conversational structures to help our students with the assessment process. So that can be between peers. So could they learn from other students, learning groups to help them prepare for an assessment, and also with their tutors and teachers. We want to think of more ways that learners can bring their personal experiences into assessment. So how can they use that experience to communicate in a way that they want to, and also to bring their own stories into assessment so it seems more relevant to them. But this is also thinking about their goals and ambitions. How can we make the assessment journey more authentic for them so it responds to their goals? And we're also kind of looking at the different ways that learners can select different assessment tasks. So we're starting to design our assessment so there's more optionality in it, so that actually learners can think about their preferred methods of communicating and choose an assessment based on that. I think, gradually we want to build up to a high level skill where learners start to look at the assessment criteria and create their own projects from that. So that's what we're also going to be focusing on. Thanks, Nat. So really, what can learning design do for you? Well, it can ensure that courses are well structured. So we're at the heart of what we do is we're designing for student engagement. So we take a student-centered approach to everything we do. And we're looking at not necessarily what the students are going to be learning, but how they're going to be learning it. We want to ensure that learners are engaged in a range of activities. So as learning designers, we're really kind of fundamental to that process of working with our module teams to ensure that's happening. Again, we want to provide spaces for learners to give them the opportunity to test out their skills and knowledge. And that can be in things like formative assessment, but it can be in activities before an assessment takes place, so that learners feel confident that they're moving into the assessment points comfortably and with that confidence they need. We want to ensure that students continue with their studies. And we do that by making sure that they feel completely engaged and that the courses are well balanced and they don't feel that there's too much workload. So as Nat's mentioned, we really start to map out the workload. But again, we want to make sure that they're part of the narrative of the course in some way and that they're active participants, because that will keep them engaged. We also make sure that we tap into current research and we use this to inform our design. We make sure that we're looking at innovative theory around design practice in terms of education, and we use that to map that and plan it into our designing, and we test that with students. That's a really important part of the work we do. And we make effective use of available tools and technologies, but also we also kind of make sure that we design new tools and technologies working with our module team. So we really do look at innovation to help our students to communicate. So really that's our breakdown of what learning design can do for modules and how it can support students. So thank you for listening and for inviting us to talk to you today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark and Natasha, and brilliantly on time as well. Thank you. Just say we can now access the chat. So perhaps Mark and Natasha, you could put the links to the blogs and the resources in the chat for everyone to see. That'd be really useful. We did build in time for a 5-minute break now, if people want to go and get a coffee, or we can just carry on. What do people prefer?
Thanks a lot, Martin. I guess we could have a 5-minute break in between and then to restart the subsequent sessions.
Yes, okay. If we start at 15 minutes past. Good.
Yes.
Okay, so go and get yourself a coffee or tea or whatever, and we'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you. If you're there, Simon, do you want to try putting your slides up?
Thanks, Martin. I'll give that a go. Okay. I think I have to wait until the the current splash page comes off.
All right, then we're coming back slowly to the webinar. Simon, could you try share your slides right now?
I think the current person sharing needs to stop sharing so I can come in.
It should be able for you to start sharing from your side. Just try it.
Okay, I've got can't start screen share while another participant is sharing.
Yeah, whoever's sharing this needs to stop sharing, and then Simon can share, I think.
I think we're just waiting to get the screen share sorted.
All right, then let's continue.
Okay, that looks better. Okay. So let's start slideshow. Okay, so can everyone see this? Okay.
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so I guess welcome back. It's great to be joining you this morning or this afternoon in your case. My name is Simon Cross. I'm a senior lecturer and also associate director at the Institute of Educational Technology at the Open University. The Institute of Educational Technology was formed a year after the OU was established, so back in 1970. So the Institute is an indication, both also as we're still around today. It's a recognition of how important educational technology is to the university and continues to be to the university. One of my research interests is in assessment, and I'll be sharing some of those insights along with a variety of other things in this presentation. Obviously, I think when I sat down to write this, I realized there was so much to say and so little time to say it. What I plan to do in this session is to talk a little bit about assessment at the Open University and try to retain this learning design frame a little bit that that was shared in the previous session. And I also want to share with you and to maybe to give some takeaway messages that might help you think about when you're designing for online assessment in your universities. It's 24 hours, given the interest in this as well. And as I think Martin said earlier, if this really is a taster, one can go into any of these slides or possibly even one of the lines on these slides in an awful lot more detail. So what I want to do today is talk to you and break this presentation into two parts. The first part is an introduction, and the second part it breaks down to sort of 7 aspects of online assessment. So in this first part, I want to talk about digital assessment at the OU, to recap a little bit on what's been said before. Secondly, to reflect on some of the affordances of online assessment. Then to consider the assessment design space, if you like. The previous session talked a little bit about thinking about design. On assessment phrased in a kind of learning design speak, if you like. So first off, the OU has been a leader in implementing innovative approaches to digital assessment for decades, really. It has excellent performance on assessment-related measures in the national surveys, and 2 of those are included on the bottom of this slide. Both great satisfaction with respect to receiving comments, so receiving feedback on assignments, and I'll come back to that a bit later, but also in terms of marking assessment being fair and obviously equitable. Every year, the OU handles over 750,000 assignments through its online assignment handling system. And one of the things I'll be talking a little bit later in this presentation about will be the online exams that we implemented in 2020 and 2021. 57 of our modules were presented with remote online exams, and that's affected over 10,000 students. So one of the things I'll be able to do is to share some insight from some of those student experiences a little later. Digital assessment, obviously, at the OU is also, there's a whole infrastructure behind this. The assessment programme coordinates this centrally, and there are a number of communities that practice across the university. And there's also a lot of active research and scholarship in assessment, both within units such as the Institute of Education and Technology, where myself and Martin are based, but also in the faculties themselves through scholarship and through researchers there also. So some of the affordances of online assessment, I think, have been touched upon already in this session. One of the things that I think we're all absolutely interested in and are really focusing on is the ability of online assessment to transcend place, whether that is place in terms of distance learning or place in terms of being able to situate learning in the workplace, the location where the student is working often full time. Secondly, scale. Scale is something which is a really interesting area with respect to online assessment, because it's both an enabler but also presents challenges. There's also the speed and the cost. The speed both of processing the assessment, but also of being able to share feedback with learners, but also the costs involved in terms of potential economies of scale. Other affordances relate around being able to offer an integrated experience, integrated that is with the VLE, so the platform which is being used for the delivery and the teaching. It can help with the management and the monitoring of the processes, because it's obviously digital, because these records and interactions are digital. There's a potential for better fit for learner needs, for personalisation. I think Mark mentioned earlier about optionality. Also, in terms of online assessment, it also makes viable assessment in smaller units of learning. And I mentioned here micro-credentials, because that's one area that the university has been doing work in for a number of years now and continues to do. I won't say much about that in this presentation, but just to flag that it's there. Also, online assessment is compatible with a number of alternative digital forms of recognition. One may be aware of, for example, digital badges, but there's a whole plethora of these kinds of things that are a kind of new and alternative, but they take digital forms as opposed to analog physical certificates, if you like. And one of the things that we've certainly noticed, obviously, and many others have with the pandemic, is that online assessment for the business is an awful lot more resilient to disruption, because it essentially takes away that need for having a physical place in which to take that assessment. So I'm often asked what works. Well, my answer, maybe this is quite an academic answer, is that it depends. But I want to sort of to present that in a positive light, in the sense that it really depends on what you want to achieve. And this is kind of at the crux of any form of assessment, whether it's a normal assessment or whether it's online assessment, which is thinking about what the learning outcomes are. How do you know that they have been achieved, i.e. assessment of learning? And then also how to build assessment into the design of the teaching itself, which is assessment for learning. And this dichotomy here between assessment of learning and assessment for learning, of course, is very well established. And it also depends very much on your context. And that's where thinking about the design space, the different elements of the design that you need to take into consideration when constructing online assessment really come to the fore. So I've had a go here at just sketching out a little bit of one of these design spaces might look like. It's not intended to be complete by any means, but it's intended to show that there are a number of different considerations at play and that these are all interrelated. What I think most of you will be most familiar with are the are the kind of the primary interests around the award. So the continuous assessment, and we call those tutor marked assignments or TMAs at the Open University. And then we have the end of module assessment, which are either an examination or another form of end of module assignment, such as an assignment, a project, an essay, presentations, it could be recordings, could be media, or whatever. So we have a variety of different types of end of module assignment, of which exams are a portion. And I think it's probably about half, possibly not even half of OU modules now end in an exam. So many students will have a combination of exams and end of module assignments. But of course, underneath that, there's a variety of support by tutors and by the module team. Some of it written beforehand to help communicate standards and guidance. Some of it involved very much with the continuous assessment itself around providing feedback and providing feed forward. And some of it which is relevant to particular skills such as assessment literacies, and I'll come on to talk about those a little later. And also one of the areas that I'm really interested in, which I don't think gets maybe as much attention as it should, and that's the support around revision, about how students to move from the learning and the assessment they've done within the course to then preparing themselves for whatever the assignment is that they get at the end. Now, a number of universities, and the OU is not unique in this sense, has been the challenge of thinking about how one can use assessment for retention. And I think it's already been mentioned a little bit already, but it is an important design consideration. It's something that we know can help to continue to engage and to continue to provide students with both the structure and a pacing and a point at which they can continue to sort of build and reflect on their learning. So assessment for engagement is very important. Assessment for relationship, or assessment as relationship building, I think is as well, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And there's also other elements that one can introduce for retention. One of those, of course, is the retake or the resit, which can happen after the end of module assessment. And finally, for the purposes just of this exercise at least, thinking about the building into your online assessment methods of quality assurance and also quality enhancement. So how can one use assessment and the output from assessment to better improve teaching? And you've heard a little bit from the learning design team about that already. Think about how learning analytics and assessment analytics can be used within the teaching and the assessment process, but also listening to the student voice and the feedback that you get from student surveys, for example, amongst other things. And again, I'll come back to talk about that as well. So just picking up on that earlier definition of learning design, my view, I think, on assessment is that we need to be moving away from talking about assessment as being learning and assessment to thinking about assessment as learning. Assessment is learning activity. And the definition I have on the right here, I hope might be quite useful to try and articulate that. But I think, thinking about assessment as an additional operation that's applied to the output of learning activity, most often, but not always, by the teacher. And I think what this does is it makes sure that we focus on the fact that the learners are doing something while they're doing assessment. They're doing some form of learning, and that the assessment is something that we as teachers and as educators perform around that output, if you like. And it also recognises that there's a mediation here. And obviously in online assessment, that's a technology. There's a technology there potentially supporting that mediation. And it also recognises that while most often we think about assessment as being between the learner and the teacher, there's also a whole range of other different types, not least, say, group working and peer assessment, where the relationship, I think, the assessment relationship actually is very different. So moving on from that, I guess, introduction, what I thought would be quite useful to do would be to pick out, I guess, seven topics, if you like, to talk a little bit about. And these of course not exhaustive, but I hope present at least a range of an insight into the kind of things that the university thinks about when it's constructing and delivering and supporting online assessment. First of all, look a little bit about the technologies and the impact on learner experience, then move through talking about our continuous assessment, our tutor-marked assignments, to give you a little bit of a sense of how we organise that. Then to flag up the importance of the student voice and how assessment, I think, and this is, I think, something really interesting to think a bit more about, is how assessment can be used to build relationships. Then to reflect on the importance of assessment literacy before moving on to, I think, what many of you will be interested in and also have had a lot of experience yourselves on as well, which is this online exam challenge. How do we crack this very, very difficult but potentially very rewarding challenge? And finally, just to almost as a reminder, to sort of talk about the processes and the infrastructures, the kind of things that make all this sort of kind of assessment happen. And I think that's one thing which the university, having been doing this for so long, has got a lot of expertise in as well. So first of all, technology impact. The OU has been, of course, using technology for quite some time. And I think this is really important, both in terms of teaching, but thinking about the learner experience. Obviously, don't have too much time to talk about this in detail, but this is taken from some work from Matthew Hillier in Australia from a few years ago now. But he found that there are a number of different factors affecting the experience of using technology during exams. These are affective factors, sort of emotional factors, if you like, so stress, anxiety, etc. The validity and the reliability of the assessment and the test itself, if you like, in terms of how accurately and reliably it's actually testing. Security, which I think many of us would sort of see as academic integrity, possibly. Practicality, which of course is a really big thing when you move online, respect to access and respect to use, if nothing else. Sixthly, the impact on the student experience of producing. Students might be using newer technologies, they might be using more different types of technologies, and there's obviously the skills that they have in terms of using those and producing those assessment artifacts are important. And finally, the kind of the disposition that the learner has towards technology. I remember being involved in a piece of work at the OU now, it's like 10 years or so ago, where we were looking at universities across the UK in terms of their attitudes towards technology. But that kind of attitude to adoption as well, I think, is very important in terms of framing how receptive learners can be, and certainly something to think about. So secondly, how do we manage continuous assessment online? Now, of course, this is a relatively easy thing compared to exams to do. The OU has these tutor-marked assessments. There are usually 1 per 10 points. So on our standard 60-point modules, there are 6 TMAs. And to give you an indication, a degree is comprised of 360 points. So a 60-point course is a sixth of that. Learners get individual feedback on every TMA. So that means that their tutor, who is in these small groups of 15 to 25, will mark and provide feedback to every student for every one of those. So a student will get 6 TMAs returned with feedback for every module. These are mostly tutor marked, although we do have some electronically marked assessments through the system. This is handled through an assessment management platform, of course, and we use a whole range of different types of technology to support that assessment, some of which I think Mark's mentioned before, but as you're well aware, there's a huge range of that, and a number of benefits behind this. TMAs add pace and structure to the learning design. The marks and feedback are available and can be managed online and referred back to by the student, even when they're taking their next module. There's a relatively quick turnaround for this, so students will get their marks and their feedback, more importantly, it's the time for the feedback within 2 weeks. It allows students during the module to familiarise themselves with academic integrity issues, and also using the technology and this approach during the continuous assessment element helps students to build confidence and competence when they potentially have to go to more higher stakes assessment later on. The third point I want to talk about was the centrality, I guess, if you like, to the student voice. this is something which the university recognises being absolutely critical, and we spend a lot of time and effort on trying to understand what our students want, and also how the students experience and find what it is that we actually teach them. Now, that student voice can be used in the initial design of assessment and learning. All the faculties undertake student voice consultations, and there are a number of scholarship projects around this. But I think one of the other really interesting things, which I guess is an ongoing challenge for all of us, is how you involve the student themselves, so you get their personal perspective, their personal role in that assessment. And I'm thinking here, for example, of things like dialogic feedback. In our surveys, we found that although 81% of students talk to their tutor for advice before they submit their assignment, only around 19% of students will contact their tutor afterwards. Now, that could be because the feedback is excellent, but there's also an opportunity there to be thinking about how one involves the learner more. And the other thing that we have been doing and developing are a number of different types of research instruments to understand that experience. They're the national ones, the National Student Survey. The Open University has its own student experience of a module survey, and that's a survey that goes out to students on all modules every time they finish a module. So we have data for all our modules, but that's quite high level. It has a few questions about assessment. And what we also have, though, are more research orientated instruments which dive down a lot more further. So one of those is the Student Experience of Feedback Assessment and Revision Survey, which I lead, and that has about 120 question items. So it really drills down and helps us to look at the relationships between these different elements of assessment in a lot more detail. And we also have the ability, because we gather this data, because the learning data is online, assessment data is online, to use this for things such as predictive analytics. And I'd love to talk a lot more about this, because the university is really leading the way in this, but using this data to be able to provide insight, which is then communicated to the tutors, which means the tutors can then act on that by contacting and supporting tutors. So it's able to use this data and to process that and to spot those students, for example, who may need more of the support, who might be struggling. And just to give a very brief illustration here, this really is just to illustrate the fact that learners do differ in terms of what they're interested in. On the left, we see that there's a huge difference in terms of the age of the learner, in terms of how much they want to have a greater, whether they want a greater say or not in setting their criteria, getting feedback. And on the right, there's a great variation in terms of the flexibility they want around exams. So fourthly, obviously, assessment can be used to build relationships, and this is a really important thing to think about. The university adopts what I guess would be called a summative formative model. The students submit their assignments and then they receive feedback from that. And this, of course, has always been regarded as an important point of contact. But I think the question is, how can we use this more? How can we use the assessment to build a relationship with the tutor, but also to build the relationships between groups, between peers, either as assessors or whatever, and to think about this around the assessment, so preparing for the assessment and also reflecting back on the assessment, something which I think is a really great opportunity for distance learning. And I'm obviously I'm aware of time, so I'll leave these for the slides for you to look at later, but I have included in a couple of slides some examples of how this has been used within the university. The fifth point relates to assessment literacies, so the skills and the knowledge that learners need to perform to the best of their ability in their assessment. Now, our research has picked up at least 3 different types of literacy. Other research obviously distinguishes between others. Those tend to relate around process literacy, so knowing how to answer the question, how to interpret the question, how to use the feedback productively, how to determine whether they agree with that feedback. But the key thing here, I think, is the fact that moving online introduces new types of literacy. So you've got technology literacy, you've got a greater literacy around academic integrity, and you've also got that great awareness of being able to manage your new spaces. So the place where you undertake your exam, for example, which often is the same space that you're using for study as well. So moving on to this 6th point, and this I think is around the online exam challenge. And I I'm not sure that there's a right way to do this yet. And I think the key thing is that the university, the OU, is still considered as this work in process, if you like. We have had many modules, as I say, who have tried alternatives to the exam and also online exams. We have, even before the pandemic, offered remote exams, often supervised remote exams for students with disabilities who can't get to the exam hall. So this is something which we've been doing for a longer period of time already. But we at the university do recognise the importance of this and are looking at and continuing to explore and remain committed to exploring ways of achieving this wholesale. As has been mentioned before, there's a huge spectrum of possibilities about how an online exam can be taken. I'm sure you're also very, very aware of this. It depends on so many factors. And this chart just shows that the 57 modules that took online exams in 2020-21 also had a great variety of different types of exam question, ranging from short answer, long answer, multiple choice, maths diagrams, numerical workings, etc. So great range of different types of exam, but also the duration of those exams. So some of those exams were open for a window of up to 7 days, some over 3 days, some for a 24-hour period. So they were kind of asynchronous mostly, but that degree of asynchronicity did change and did vary. Some initial insight from our research. Quite amazingly, actually, 79%, and this is a survey with 562 respondents, said that they would prefer an online to a face-to-face exam. And even those who said they wanted a face-to-face exam said they would still like the option so that should say an option of online exams. So that's my mistake there. We've also found, comparing results from CFAR before the pandemic to online exams, that there doesn't seem to be that much difference in terms of the student experience. So it's not having an adverse impact on the student experience of exams. And as Martin mentioned earlier, there are some indications that there might be an improvement in pass rates, although it's probably also worth adding here a bit of caution, because the pandemic period, of course, has been a bit atypical. Students have had to accommodate a number of other different kinds of things as well. So there's that. We've also identified a whole range of different barriers so this is really building our understanding as an institution about what barriers there are that we need to overcome to help support students in that online assessment. And also, I think that this final point is really key as well, because the university sees online exams as a potential way of supporting student well-being and to reduce the causes of stress and anxiety. And that's one thing that a lot of our students will suffer with, and that we're really keen to help to support and find solutions to. I won't dwell too much on this, but I think there does seem to be, to me at least, a convergence from different perspectives on what good design advice looks like. So whether you look at the work around inclusive assessment, whether you look around the work around authentic assessment, whether you look around the work secure assessment, a lot of what seems to be suggested does seem to have some overlap at least. And one key thing here to mention is the aspect of accessibility, which has been alluded to earlier, but the OU has a long-standing and proven record of pedagogic expertise in making the legal adjustments that we need to do for students with disabilities, but even going beyond that. So the understanding both of what we have to do legally, but also what really does work for students with all different types of disability and additional needs. You'll be able to look at this in the slide deck in a bit more detail, but regarding exam design, I think maybe there's possibly 3 steps here. The first one is to ask yourself, is there an alternative to an exam? So can we just avoid doing the exam in the first place? Is there something which actually works better than the examination? The second one is then to think about reducing the reliance on the one-off exam at the end, the single point of failure, maybe multiple assessment points, etc. And the third point, I think, is the value of being able to design out key design out some of the problems that might be encountered in respect to cheating, in respect to plagiarism, in respect to borrowing answers from elsewhere. These are all organised in order of probably of effectiveness. So going from resequencing questions, which is not going to throw too many people off, but all the way down to the bottom. And it's these bottom few, thinking about student-directed problems, thinking about collaborative or peer review, thinking about making things personal to the student, so personal to their context, choosing things that are topical, real-world resources, so things that you can't use from last year or the year before, and thinking about practice in based real-world settings, whether that's direct or whether that's the student taking back from their workplace. It's those kinds of things that make them unique, make them much harder to cheat with, if you like. And it's also worth mentioning there, I think, around things around the cognitive ask, so asking students for their own judgment, which again is personal, but also with the individualizing of resources. And I'm aware we're just going over into 11:45 here. So I've got about 3 more slides and I'll very quickly move through these. The first one is obviously there are a number of more other additional security considerations. One of the things that's talked a lot about is how you build stronger trust with students, and that goes back to that issue about relationships as well. We haven't really done too much around verification of identity and live monitoring per se, but obviously that's something which is on our radar. And finally, there's obviously a lot of work around detection. The OU's been involved in EU projects around this as well. Again, that's probably a topic in its own right. And finally, my final couple of slides, and this 7 was really just a kind of I guess a flag up really, just to sort of say that there is an awful lot of processes and infrastructure that goes on. Must be about 10 years or so ago, myself and a colleague looked at a number of different online assessment advice and schemas, if you like, and came up with 99 benchmark criteria, which broadly fell into these kind of 7 areas around strategy, policy and expectations, around course design, teacher activity, monitoring and evaluation that we've talked a little bit about student guidelines and support communications, the same for staff, and also the building of an evidence base of templates and staff training and support. And we used a version of this about 7 or 8 years ago to look at how the university did with respect to assessment, and a number of interesting projects and things came out of that. So one of the things to think about would be, could you also look at doing some form of audit or benchmark to see where your current assessment practice is? And that might also be very helpful in terms of picking up on those more sensitive or critical areas with respect to the move to online. And bringing it all together, this slide really is just an example from one of our level 2 modules, which really hits a number of the points I've just been talking about quite coincidentally. It talks about this new module having an assessment strategy that combines short but often continuous assessment with purely online examination. It talks about having a tutorial strategy that shifts the emphasis back to active learning. So that's back to learning, just thinking about learning design, what the student's doing, and there's focus on the student needs, which of course we need to understand through the monitoring and through the surveying, etc. And the module aims to put a great emphasis on building the student-tutor relationship. And that's it. I think obviously the university has a substantial amount of experience, both in the designing and running, but also the managing and the evaluating online assessment. And it's hopefully been able to share just a little bit of that with you today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. That was excellent. I think there's a lot there to dig into, so a lot to explore, and the same with the learning design presentation. So we'll put all of our slides together and we'll send those to Katerina, who can distribute them or put them online somewhere for you all to access, because I'm sure there's lots there that people will want to go back over. So for the final session, I'm going to hand back to Andrew to kind of run an exploration or discussion around other issues you might want to explore, or if there's any questions that we tried to answer the questions in the Q&A session. But if there's more you want to explore, please come back. So over to you, Andrew. Thanks.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, colleagues. Obviously, I'm not an expert in any of this domain, but what I have done is shared some of my colleagues' work in the chat, particularly access to other free courses that we have, free, genuinely free. There are no strings attached. So, and they're also free in the sense that you can copy them, translate them, and adapt them. They're available under Creative Commons license. We prefer you don't sell them to anybody else, but you continue to provide them for free. So I've put several links in there so you can see those courses. We also have a slightly less well-known, but for smaller institutions, we have a free open Moodle system where you can build your own course. It's got to be a course that's free and open to other people. But if you don't have your own learning management system or you don't have a Moodle, we have a free Moodle. There's no charge to use it. You can place a course there and teach. I don't think at the moment it's got the Ukrainian language pack on it, but it's a Moodle, and you can certainly build courses there. Many people have. We're working with a potential new Open University of Ghana and a potential new Open University of Kenya. And they're certainly, with Simon, I think in particular, have been using the Open Moodle system to develop some of their courses. So there are lots of free courses. Do take a look at Open Learn, and the links, I think, Katerina, are in the chat, aren't they? They are there.
Yes, definitely. Links are in the chat. And then for all the registered participants to this webinar today, we'll be sending out this information-packed email with all the links and all the additional materials, including presentations from today.
Great. So very difficult to have a conversation with 250 people. We've tried to take questions and answer questions where they've come in, and I hope we've had a chance to do that. In terms of next steps, Katerina, we probably need to talk offline about where we can go next. We were given a list of questions that you would like answered, and we're aware that today we haven't answered all those questions. Where it's practical and feasible, we will look at those questions offline and see if we can provide some written answers. Not all, some of the questions were quite complicated with very, very significant systems maps that would need to be applied and developed and so on. But we will try and answer some of those questions separately and provide you with those over the next few days or weeks. But otherwise, Katerina, is there anything else we should or could do at this stage?
I believe it's been really amazing opportunity already to have you with all the presentations. I'm scrolling through this chat, and it looks like it really met the expectations and even exceeded them. So we all look quite sad with everything. Unless there is something else you would like to mention from your side, we could try wrapping up. And I would like to stress once again what a pleasure it's been to have you here today. And thank you very much for your commitment to help our universities in Ukraine to understand how to teach online more effectively, in a more engaging way, and to make sure that assessment can be done properly too. So thank you very much for these presentations that we had with you today. And we'd be happy to discuss further the possibilities of additional support to our universities in these challenging times.
Well, look, colleagues, at my end, unless I've missed anything, I think on behalf, have I missed anything? No. So on behalf of them, I'd really like to thank you for your patience. We're seeing names of institutions in Kharkiv and other places, and all we see are the news here. And I'm just sitting in amazement that people are able to attend and pay attention during such a difficult time. So if there's anything we can do, obviously, I hope the spirit is one of support from us and enthusiasm to support whatever we can. So hopefully we'll be able to talk again. But thank you for today. Thank you for your patience and your interest.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.